Here's what I want you to think about for a second. What makes someone truly wise? Is it how many books they've read? How many degrees hang on their wall? Whether they can quote the right philosophers at dinner parties? We throw around the word wisdom constantly. Ancient wisdom, timeless wisdom, words of wisdom. But what does it actually mean? Because here's the thing. If you went back to India around 700 BCE and asked people who the wisest person was, you'd probably get answers about who performed the most elaborate rituals, who knew the exact Sanskrit verses, who could conduct the perfect sacrifice with the precise number of offerings at exactly the right time. Wisdom, in that world, meant knowing the rules and following them flawlessly, and then this guy shows up and says, what if all of that is missing the point entirely? That's Yajnavalkya. And he didn't just tweak the system, he burned it down and built something completely different in its place. Now I know what you're thinking. Great, another ancient sage, another mystic sitting under a tree dispensing cryptic wisdom. But hold on, Yajnavalkya was something else entirely. This wasn't some gentle guru offering vague platitudes about inner peace. This was an intellectual revolutionary, a philosophical bomb thrower, someone who walked into the most prestigious court in India, looked at the entire religious establishment, and basically said, "You're all doing it wrong." The audacity of that move. We'll get to the full story in a bit. But imagine the scene. Imagine being so confident in your understanding of reality that you're willing to challenge everything your entire civilization holds sacred. That takes either profound wisdom or profound arrogance. With Yajnavalkya, it turned out to be the former. What makes his story so compelling is that he didn't just criticize the old system. He offered something better, something deeper. He took philosophy from being about external performance, the right words, the right rituals, the right sacrifices, and turned it inward. He asked, what if the truth you're looking for isn't out there in the ceremonies and the chanting? What if it's in here in the nature of consciousness itself? This shift, from ritual to reality, from performance to understanding, this is one of the most important transformations in human intellectual history, and most people have never heard of the guy who made it happen. We're going to explore the philosophy of someone who fundamentally changed how millions of people understand the nature of reality, the self, and what it means to be free. His ideas shaped Hinduism, Buddhism, yoga philosophy, and influenced thinkers across millennia. But more than that, his central insights remain powerfully relevant today. Because at the heart of everything Yajnavalkya taught is one simple, profound, terrifying question. Who are you, really? Not your job, not your relationships, not your thoughts or your body or your memories. Strip all of that away. What's left? And can knowing the answer to that question actually set you free? Let's find out. All right, so who was this person who changed everything? Here's what we know. Yajnavalkya lived around 700 BCE in ancient India, and he shows up most prominently in a text called the Bahudakshina Upanishad, which is basically one of the oldest and most important philosophical texts in the Indian tradition. He's not just mentioned in passing, he's the star, the main character, the philosophical heavyweight around whom the entire text revolves. But unlike a lot of ancient sages who are more legend than person, Yajnavalkya feels remarkably real. We get actual dialogues, specific debates, concrete philosophical arguments. He's not floating around in some timeless mythical space. He's a historical figure engaged in very real intellectual combat. The setting for much of his philosophy is the court of King Janaka of Videha. Now, Janaka wasn't just any king, he was known as a philosopher king, someone genuinely interested in deep questions about reality and consciousness. His court became this incredible intellectual hub where the greatest minds of the era would gather to debate, to challenge each other, to push the boundaries of human understanding. Picture it. This is 700 BCE India. The Vedic tradition is well established. There's a whole priestly class, the Brahmins, whose entire authority rests on their mastery of ritual. They know the hymns, they perform the sacrifices, they maintain the cosmic order through precise ceremonial action. This is how the universe works according to the dominant worldview. The gods are pleased through proper ritual, prosperity comes through correct sacrifice, the priests are the essential intermediaries. And into this world walks Yajnavalkya, and he's about to flip the script entirely. What made him dangerous, and I mean genuinely threatening to the establishment, was that he combined two things rarely found together: absolute mastery of the traditional knowledge and the willingness to transcend it completely. He knew the Vedas inside and out. He could out-ritual the ritualists. But then he had the intellectual courage to say, this isn't enough. This isn't what matters most. Here's where it gets really interesting. At Janaka's court, Yajnavalkya participated in these legendary philosophical debates, and one of his most famous opponents was a woman named Gargi Vachaknavi. Let that sink in for a second. We're talking about 700 BCE, and we have records of a woman philosopher engaging in public intellectual debate with the era's greatest male thinker. Gargi wasn't some token presence. She was fierce. She challenged Yajnavalkya with some of the deepest cosmological questions imaginable. She pushed him. She tested his logic. And he took her completely seriously as an intellectual equal. Their exchanges are preserved in the Upanishads, and they're remarkable. At one point, Gargi asks him about the very fabric of reality. What is everything woven upon? What's the foundation beneath the foundation? And Yajnavalkya's responses show both profound philosophical depth and genuine respect for her as a thinker. This tells us something important about who Yajnavalkya was. He wasn't just brilliant, he was intellectually honest. He engaged with ideas based on their merit, not on the social status of who presented them. In a rigidly hierarchical society, that's revolutionary. But what really set Yajnavalkya apart from his contemporaries was the nature of his inquiry. Most Vedic thinkers were focused on cosmology. How did the universe begin? What are the gods like? How do we maintain cosmic order? These are external questions, questions about the world out there. Yajnavalkya turned the lens around. He became obsessed with consciousness itself, with the nature of the self, with what it means to know and to be. He pioneered what we might call the introspective turn in Indian philosophy, the shift from studying the universe to studying the one who studies the universe. And this wasn't just abstract navel-gazing. Yajnavalkya believed and tried to demonstrate that understanding the true nature of the self was the key to liberation. Not just intellectual liberation, but actual freedom from suffering, from the cycle of death and rebirth, from all the limitations that bind human existence. His reputation grew to legendary proportions. He became known as the king of yogis, the greatest of sages, the one who truly understood. But here's what I love about the historical records we have. They don't just show us a wise man dispensing wisdom. They show us a fierce debater, a sharp intellect, someone who could be cutting and direct and occasionally even arrogant in his certainty. In other words, they show us a real person, someone who was confident enough in his understanding to challenge an entire civilization's assumptions. Someone who believed that reason and direct insight mattered more than tradition and ritual authority. This is the person who's about to transform Indian philosophy forever, not through mystical revelation, not through divine intervention, but through careful reasoning, systematic inquiry, and the courage to follow truth wherever it leads, even if it means overturning everything people thought they knew. So here's what made him so dangerous to the establishment. Okay, so imagine you're living in Vedic India. Your entire world runs on ritual. I mean everything. Want a good harvest? There's a ritual for that. Specific mantras, specific offerings, performed at the specific time by someone who spent years memorizing the exact procedures. Want prosperity, health, success in battle, sons instead of daughters? Every single aspect of life has a corresponding ceremony, and if you get even one syllable wrong, the whole thing might backfire. The Brahmins, the priestly class, they've got this system locked down. Their authority is absolute because they're the only ones who know how to properly perform these rituals. They've memorized thousands of verses. They know which offerings please which gods. They're the essential intermediaries between humans and the cosmic order. And the system works, or at least everyone believes it works. When good things happen, it's because the rituals were performed correctly. When bad things happen, well, someone must have messed up the ceremony. The logic is airtight, self-reinforcing, and completely unquestioned. Until Yajnavalkya shows up and says, "What if I told you that knowledge, direct understanding of reality, is more powerful than any ritual you could ever perform?" This is heresy. This is philosophical dynamite, because if he's right, then the entire power structure of Vedic society just became optional. Now Yajnavalkya wasn't stupid. He didn't just dismiss ritual entirely. That would have gotten him run out of town or worse. Instead, he did something more subtle and more devastating. He subordinated ritual to knowledge. He said essentially, sure, rituals have their place, but they're not the ultimate goal. They're not what sets you free. They're like training wheels. Useful for beginners, but eventually you need to move beyond them. What matters, he argued, is direct knowledge of the self, understanding the true nature of consciousness, seeing through the illusions that bind us to suffering and limitation. And here's the kicker. You don't need a priest for that. You need wisdom. You need insight. You need to look inward with absolute honesty and clarity. Can you imagine how threatening this was? Yajnavalkya was essentially saying that the most important thing in life, liberation, freedom, truth, was available to anyone willing to do the philosophical work. Not just to people who could afford elaborate ceremonies. Not just to those born into the right caste. Anyone. But he didn't stop there. He introduced something even more radical, the doctrine of karma and rebirth, but with a twist that made it personal and psychological rather than just cosmic and mechanical. As one acts, so one becomes. That's the formula. Simple, elegant, and absolutely revolutionary. Think about what this means. Your actions don't just affect your external circumstances. They shape who you fundamentally are. Every choice you make, every desire you follow, every habit you reinforce, these aren't just behaviors. They're sculpting your very self. They're determining what you'll become, not just in this life, but in the next one, and the one after that, in an endless cycle. This isn't the ritual worldview where you do X ceremony and get Y result. This is something much deeper and more personal. This is saying you are actively creating yourself moment by moment through your choices. You are the author of your own character, your own destiny, your own bondage or freedom. And here's where Yajnavalkya gets really psychologically sophisticated. He identifies desire as the root cause of this entire cycle. Not sin, not breaking cosmic laws, not angering the gods. Desire. As long as you want things, as long as you're driven by craving, by attachment, by the need for pleasure or the fear of pain, you're trapped. Because desire creates action. Action creates consequences. Consequences create new situations that trigger new desires. Round and round it goes. Birth after birth, life after life, an endless wheel of becoming. Now this might sound pessimistic, like he's saying all desire is bad and you should just give up on life. But that's not what he means at all. He's making a much more subtle point about the nature of freedom. Think about it this way. As long as you need external things to be happy, wealth, status, pleasure, even other people's approval, you're vulnerable. You're at the mercy of circumstances. You're not free. You're a puppet dancing on strings made of your own cravings. Real freedom, Yajnavalkya argues, comes from understanding that your true nature, the self, the Atman, doesn't need anything. It's complete in itself. It's beyond all these temporary desires and fears. And when you realize this directly and experientially, the whole cycle just stops. You're no longer driven by desire because you've seen through the illusion that anything external could complete you. You're no longer creating karma because you're no longer acting from that place of craving and attachment. You're free. This is a complete inversion of the ritualistic worldview. Instead of, perform the right ceremonies and the gods will give you what you want, Yajnavalkya is saying, stop wanting and you'll discover you already have everything you need. Instead of, follow the rules and you'll be rewarded, he's saying, understand yourself and you'll transcend the entire system of rewards and punishments. Instead of, knowledge is dangerous, leave it to the priests, he's saying, knowledge is liberation, and it's available to anyone brave enough to seek it. The implications are staggering. If Yajnavalkya is right, then the entire elaborate machinery of Vedic ritual, all those ceremonies, all those priests, all that social hierarchy built on religious authority, it's not wrong exactly, but it's missing the point. It's addressing symptoms rather than causes. It's trying to rearrange the furniture when what you really need is to see that you're in the wrong house entirely. And this brings us to the heart of his philosophy, the central insight that everything else flows from. Because knowledge is great, but knowledge of what exactly? Here's where it gets weird. All right, this is where we dive into the deep end. Stay with me, because what Yajnavalkya is about to claim is genuinely strange, genuinely profound, and if he's right, it changes absolutely everything. So, knowledge over ritual? Fine. But knowledge of what? Yajnavalkya's answer. Knowledge of the self, the Atman, your true nature. And immediately you might think, okay, I know myself. I know who I am. I'm me. I have thoughts, feelings, memories, a personality. What's the big mystery? But here's where Yajnavalkya stops you and says, no. Everything you just listed, your thoughts, your feelings, your memories, your personality, even your sense of I, none of that is the real self. Those are all temporary changing phenomena. The true self is something else entirely. This is hard to grasp because we're so identified with our mental and physical experience. When you say I, you probably mean something like this body, these thoughts, this particular stream of consciousness that's been continuous since you were born. But Yajnavalkya is making a much more radical claim. He's saying there's something in you, or as you, or underlying you, that's eternal, unchanging, and completely distinct from everything you normally identify as yourself. The Atman isn't your ego. It's not your mind. It's not your body. It's not your emotions or your memories or your personality traits. All of those things come and go. They change. They're born and they die. The body ages. Thoughts arise and pass away. Even your sense of personal identity shifts over time. But the Atman is eternal. It was never born, so it can never die. It doesn't change because it's not in time the way we normally understand it. It's not affected by anything that happens in the world of experience because it's not part of that world. It's what makes that world possible in the first place. Now, if Yajnavalkya had stopped there, this would be interesting but maybe not revolutionary. Lots of philosophical traditions have some concept of a soul or eternal self. But here's where he takes it to another level entirely. He says, this Atman, this true self that you are, it's not separate from Brahman. Brahman is the ultimate reality, the ground of all being, the universal consciousness that underlies and pervades everything that exists. It's not a god exactly. It's more fundamental than that. It's the very fabric of reality itself, the source from which everything emerges and to which everything returns. And Yajnavalkya's shocking claim is, Atman and Brahman are one. They're not two separate things. Your deepest self and the ultimate reality of the universe are identical. This is the doctrine of non-duality, Advaita in Sanskrit. And it's genuinely difficult to wrap your mind around because it violates our basic intuition that we're separate individuals in a world of other separate things. Think about your normal experience. You feel like you're in here behind your eyes and the world is out there. There's you and then there's everything else, subject and object, self and other. This seems completely obvious, completely fundamental to experience itself. But Yajnavalkya is saying, that sense of separation is an illusion. A very convincing illusion, granted, one that structures all of ordinary experience, but an illusion nonetheless. At the deepest level, there's no separation between the knower and the known, between consciousness and reality, between you and the universe. There's just one reality, one consciousness, one being. And you are that. Not you as in your ego or personality, but you as in your deepest nature, the Atman. The Sanskrit phrase that captures this is tat tvam asi, that thou art. The ultimate reality. That's what you are. Not what you have, not what you're connected to, but what you fundamentally are. Now, I know this sounds mystical and maybe even incoherent. How can I be the universe? I'm clearly just this limited person with a particular body and mind, living in a particular place and time. But Yajnavalkya isn't talking about your surface identity. He's talking about what you are when you strip away everything temporary, everything conditioned, everything that can change. What remains when you remove all the layers of identification? And his answer is pure consciousness itself. Awareness without content, being without attributes, and that he claims is identical with the ground of all reality. This has massive implications. If this is true, then your deepest nature is infinite, eternal, and completely free. All the limitations you experience, mortality, suffering, fear, desire, these belong to the surface level, to the ego and the body and the mind, but they don't touch what you truly are. This is why Yajnavalkya says that knowledge of the self leads to moksha, liberation, not because knowing something magically changes your circumstances, but because realizing your true nature reveals that you were never actually bound in the first place. You thought you were this limited, mortal, vulnerable person. You thought you needed things to be happy. You thought you could be threatened or diminished or destroyed. But all of that was a case of mistaken identity. You confused yourself with the temporary phenomena, the body, the mind, the ego, when your true nature is the eternal, infinite, unchanging Atman Brahman. And when you realize this, not intellectually but directly, experientially, the entire problem of existence just dissolves. Because there's no longer anyone who needs to be saved or liberated. There's just the eternal self, which was never bound, never suffering, never limited. The cycle of rebirth continues as long as you're identified with the limited self, the ego that desires and fears and acts. But when you realize you're not that, when you see through the illusion of separation, the cycle stops, not because you escape it, but because you realize there was never anyone trapped in it to begin with. This is heavy stuff. This is genuinely difficult philosophy. And Yajnavalkya knew it was difficult, which is why he developed a specific method for discovering this truth. Okay, but how do you actually discover this? His method is brilliant. So we've got this profound claim. Your true self is eternal, infinite, identical with ultimate reality itself. Great. Wonderful. But how do you actually discover this? How do you move from intellectual understanding to direct realization? Because here's the problem. You can't just think your way to this insight. You can't reason yourself into experiencing non-duality. It's not like solving a math problem where you work through the steps and arrive at the answer. This requires a completely different kind of knowing. Direct, immediate, experiential. And Yajnavalkya developed a method for this. It's called Neti. Not this, not this. And it's one of the most elegant philosophical techniques ever devised. Here's how it works. The method is essentially systematic negation. You take everything you normally identify as yourself and you methodically reject it. Not because those things are bad or wrong, but because they're not the eternal self you're looking for. Let's walk through it. Let's actually do this right now. First step. I am not this body. Your body is constantly changing. The cells that made up your body 7 years ago have almost all been replaced. You were once a baby, then a child, now an adult. Your body ages, gets sick, heals, grows stronger or weaker. It's born and it will die. So whatever the eternal Atman is, it can't be the body. The body is an object of experience, something you're aware of, not the awareness itself. Neti. Not this. Second step. I am not these thoughts. Watch your mind for a moment. Thoughts arise, hang around for a bit, then disappear. They come and go constantly. You're not the same thoughts you had yesterday or will have tomorrow. Thoughts are temporary phenomena, like clouds passing through the sky. And you're aware of your thoughts, you can observe them, watch them come and go, so you can't be the thoughts, you're whatever is watching the thoughts. Neti, not this. Third step. I am not these emotions, these sensations, these perceptions. Same logic. Emotions arise and pass away. You feel happy, then sad, then content, then anxious. These are changing states. Sensations come and go. Pleasure, pain, comfort, discomfort. Perceptions shift constantly. What you see, hear, taste, touch, smell. All of this is the content of experience, not the experiencer itself. Neti, not this. But wait. It goes even deeper. Fourth step. I am not any quality, any attribute, any form whatsoever. Anything you can name, anything you can describe, anything you can point to, that's not the true self. Because the moment you can identify something, you've made it an object of awareness. And the Atman isn't an object, it's the subject. It's the awareness itself, not anything that appears within awareness. You're not smart or dumb, good or bad, spiritual or worldly. You're not your personality, your character traits, your habits, your preferences. All of those are just more content, more phenomena arising and passing away in consciousness. Neti, not this, not this, not this. So what's left? What remains when you've stripped away absolutely everything? And here's where it gets genuinely strange. What remains can't be described, can't be captured in words, can't be made into an object of thought. Because the moment you try to describe it, you've turned it into another this that can be negated. It's pure subjectivity, pure awareness, pure being, the witness of all experience that can never itself become an object of experience. This is the Atman. This is what you truly are. Now, I know this might sound like we've just disappeared into complete abstraction, like we've negated everything until there's nothing left, but Yajnavalkya would say that's exactly backwards. We haven't arrived at nothing. We've arrived at everything. We've stripped away all the limitations, all the false identifications, all the temporary phenomena, and what remains is the infinite, eternal, unchanging reality itself. And here's what makes this method so brilliant. It's not asking you to believe anything. It's not asking you to have faith or accept some doctrine. It's asking you to investigate your own experience directly. Look and see. Are you your body? Are you your thoughts? Are you any of these changing phenomena? And if the answer is no, if you genuinely see that you're not any of these things, then what are you? This method had a massive influence on later Indian philosophy, particularly Advaita Vedanta. Adi Shankaracharya, who lived about 200 years after Yajnavalkya, built an entire philosophical system on this foundation. The technique of Neti became one of the central practices for realizing non-dual awareness. But here's what I love about it. It's not mystical hand-waving. It's not vague spiritual poetry. It's a precise, systematic method of investigation. It's philosophy as practice, as lived inquiry, not just abstract theorizing. And you can try it yourself, right now. Just ask, what am I? And then systematically reject everything that changes, everything that comes and goes, everything that can be observed. Keep going until you can't go any further, until you arrive at the awareness itself that's doing the observing. That's the method. That's how Yajnavalkya taught people to discover their true nature. Now you might be thinking, this is fascinating, but it's also kind of impersonal, kind of cold. Where is the humanity in all this abstract metaphysics? And that's a fair question. But here's what makes this personal and beautiful. Let me tell you about one of the most profound conversations in all of philosophy, and it happens between a husband and wife. Yajnavalkya had 2 wives, Maitreyi and Katyayani. Now, before you roll your eyes at ancient polygamy, understand that these weren't typical marriages in the way we might imagine. Maitreyi, in particular, wasn't just the wife. She was a genuine spiritual seeker, a philosopher in her own right, someone deeply interested in ultimate questions. And one day, Yajnavalkya comes to her with an announcement. He's preparing to renounce worldly life. He's going to divide his property between his 2 wives and leave to become a wandering ascetic, dedicating himself entirely to the pursuit of wisdom. Now, most people in this situation would probably ask about the practical details. How much property? What are the arrangements? When are you leaving? But Maitreyi asks something completely different. She asks, if I possessed the entire earth filled with wealth, would I become immortal through that? Stop and appreciate this question. She's not asking about comfort or security or even happiness in the ordinary sense. She's asking about immortality. She's asking about what truly matters, what endures, what's ultimately real. And Yajnavalkya's response is immediate and clear. No, your life would be like that of the wealthy, but there is no hope of immortality through wealth. Then Maitreyi says something that gives me chills every time I read it. What should I do with that which will not make me immortal? Tell me, my lord, what you know. What should I do with that which will not make me immortal? Think about what she's saying. She's rejecting everything. All the wealth, all the security, all the comfort that most people spend their entire lives pursuing, because it doesn't address the fundamental question. It doesn't solve the problem of mortality, of impermanence, of the ultimate meaning of existence. This is philosophy at its most personal and most urgent. This isn't some abstract academic debate. This is someone asking what actually matters. What's worth dedicating a life to? What's real? And Yajnavalkya loves this question. You can almost feel his joy in the text. Finally, someone who gets it, someone who's asking the right question. So he teaches her, and what he teaches is everything we've been discussing, but now it's not abstract metaphysics. It's intensely personal. He tells her, that which is dearest to us is not dear because of itself, but because of the self that dwells within it. This is profound. Think about what you love. Your partner, your children, your friends, your passions. Why do you love them? Yajnavalkya is saying it's not actually because of their particular qualities, not really. It's because of the Atman, the self, that shines through them. It's because they're manifestations of that same infinite consciousness that you are. You love your spouse not ultimately because of their personality or their looks or their accomplishments. Those are all temporary, changing. You love them because you're recognizing at some deep level your own true nature reflected back at you. You're loving the self, loving itself. This transforms the whole question of love and relationship. It's not about possessing someone, not about needing them to complete you. It's about recognizing the deepest reality in each other. And then Yajnavalkya makes the crucial point. Neither wealth nor human love, as beautiful as they are, can grant immortality. Only knowledge of the self can transcend death. Because death is only a problem if you think you're the body, the personality, the individual ego. If you realize you're the eternal Atman, identical with Brahman, then what is there to die? The body dies, sure. The personality dissolves. But what you truly are was never born, so it can never die. This is what Maitreyi was asking about. Not how to live longer, not how to be more comfortable, but how to transcend mortality itself. And Yajnavalkya's answer is, know yourself. Really know yourself. See through the illusion of separation and limitation. What makes this dialogue so beautiful is that it's happening in the context of a real relationship. This isn't some detached sage lecturing to a crowd. This is a husband teaching his wife, a wife challenging her husband, two people who love each other grappling with the deepest questions of existence. And Maitreyi isn't a passive student. She asks follow-up questions. She pushes for clarity. She wants to understand, not just believe. The text presents her as Yajnavalkya's intellectual equal, someone capable of comprehending these profound truths. This is remarkable for 700 BCE, or frankly, for any era. The text gives us a woman philosopher, a woman spiritual seeker, engaged in the highest level of metaphysical dialogue, and Yajnavalkya takes her completely seriously. He doesn't condescend. He doesn't simplify. He teaches her everything he knows. There's something deeply moving about this. Philosophy here isn't cold and abstract. It's arising from love, from the desire to share the most important truth with the person you care about most. It's saying, I'm leaving, but I want to give you something more valuable than any material wealth. I want to give you the knowledge that will set you free. And Maitreyi receives it. She understands. The dialogue ends with her grasping the essential teaching, that the self alone is to be known, and in knowing it, everything becomes known. This personal dimension of Yajnavalkya's philosophy is crucial. Yes, he's making bold metaphysical claims about the nature of reality. Yes, he's developing sophisticated epistemological methods. But at the heart of it all is this deeply human concern. How do we transcend suffering? How do we face mortality? How do we live with wisdom and freedom? And the answer comes not through ritual, not through belief, not through anything external, but through direct knowledge of what we truly are. But his influence didn't stop with beautiful conversations. His ideas shaped entire traditions, entire ways of thinking about reality and consciousness. Let's look at that legacy. So we've explored Yajnavalkya's revolutionary ideas, his methods, his personal teachings, but here's the thing about truly transformative philosophy. It doesn't just live in one moment, in one conversation, in one person's lifetime. It ripples outward through time, shaping how entire civilizations think about reality. And Yajnavalkya's influence? It's massive. We're talking about ideas that have shaped philosophical and spiritual traditions for over 2,700 years. Let's start with the texts themselves. The Brihadaranyaka Upanishad, where most of Yajnavalkya's teachings appear, is considered one of the oldest and most important Upanishads. And Yajnavalkya isn't just featured in it. He's essentially the author, or at least the central voice. The entire text is structured around his dialogues, his debates, his teachings. Now, the Upanishads as a whole represent this crucial transition in Indian thought. From the ritual-focused Vedas to the more philosophical, introspective inquiry into the nature of consciousness and reality. And Yajnavalkya is right at the heart of that transition. He's the bridge figure, the one who made it possible to move from how do we please the gods to what is the nature of the self. But his influence goes beyond just one text. There's also the Yajnavalkya Smriti, a comprehensive Dharma text attributed to him. This is fascinating because it shows that he wasn't just a metaphysician lost in abstract contemplation. He was also concerned with practical ethics, with law, with social conduct, with how people should actually live. The Yajnavalkya Smriti addresses everything from property rights to criminal justice to ritual obligations to moral duties. It's one of the most important legal and ethical texts in the Hindu tradition. And what's interesting is how it integrates his philosophical insights with practical guidance for living in society. You can see his core principles showing up even in the legal and ethical discussions. The emphasis on intention over mere external action. The recognition that wisdom matters more than ritual correctness. The understanding that true dharma, righteous conduct, flows from understanding your true nature, not just from following rules. But here's where Yajnavalkya's influence gets really profound. He's credited with coining and developing the term Advaita, non-duality. This isn't just a word. This is the foundation of one of the most influential philosophical schools in Indian history. Advaita Vedanta, the philosophy of non-dual reality, traces its roots directly back to Yajnavalkya's teachings about the identity of Atman and Brahman. Centuries later, Adi Shankaracharya would systematize these ideas into a comprehensive philosophical system. Shankara wrote detailed commentaries on the Upanishads, including the Brihadaranyaka, and he consistently points back to Yajnavalkya as the source of these profound insights. Shankara's entire philosophy, which has influenced millions of people and continues to shape Hindu thought today, is essentially an elaboration and systematization of what Yajnavalkya first articulated. But the influence doesn't stop with Advaita Vedanta. Yajnavalkya's ideas affected all the major schools of Indian philosophy. Even the ones that disagreed with him had to engage with his arguments. You can't do serious Indian philosophy without grappling with the questions he raised. The yoga tradition, deeply influenced by his emphasis on self-knowledge and the distinction between the true self and the changing phenomena of mind and body. The concept of Purusha in yoga philosophy, the witnessing consciousness, owes a lot to Yajnavalkya's articulation of the Atman. Buddhism, even though Buddhism explicitly rejects the concept of an eternal self, Buddhist philosophers had to carefully argue against Yajnavalkya's position. The Buddhist doctrine of anatta, no self, is in many ways a response to the Upanishadic teaching of Atman. The debate between these positions has been going on for 2,500 years, and it's still philosophically live today. And then there's the tradition of sannyasa, renunciation. The idea that the highest life is one dedicated to wisdom rather than worldly pursuits, that liberation comes through knowledge rather than action. This traces directly back to Yajnavalkya. He didn't just teach these ideas, he embodied them. His decision to renounce his wealth and become a wandering seeker established a model that millions have followed. Even today, there are sadhus and sannyasis throughout India who are, in a sense, following the path Yajnavalkya pioneered. The orange robes, the renunciation of worldly attachments, the dedication to self-inquiry. This entire tradition has its philosophical foundation in his teachings. But what's remarkable is that his influence isn't just historical. It's not like we're talking about some interesting ancient figure whose ideas are now just museum pieces. Yajnavalkya's core insights are still being taught, still being practiced, still being debated in ashrams and universities around the world. The method of Neti is still used as a meditation technique. The question, "Who am I?" which is really Yajnavalkya's question, became central to the teachings of Ramana Maharshi in the 20th century and continues to be practiced by spiritual seekers today. The concept of non-duality has influenced Western philosophy and psychology. When you read about pure consciousness in phenomenology or bare awareness, in mindfulness traditions, or even discussions of the hard problem of consciousness in contemporary philosophy of mind, you're encountering questions and concepts that Yajnavalkya was exploring 2,700 years ago. His insight that the observer and the observed might not be fundamentally separate. This resonates with certain interpretations of quantum mechanics, with discussions of consciousness in neuroscience, with debates about the nature of subjective experience in philosophy of mind. I'm not saying Yajnavalkya anticipated modern physics or neuroscience, but I am saying he asked questions that are still relevant, still pressing, still unresolved. What is consciousness? What is the relationship between subjective experience and objective reality? Is there a stable self, or just a stream of changing phenomena? These are live questions in contemporary philosophy and science, and Yajnavalkya was grappling with them millennia ago. And perhaps most importantly, his central message, that self-knowledge is the path to freedom. This continues to resonate with people across cultures and traditions. Whether you're in a Hindu ashram in India, a Buddhist meditation center in California, or a philosophy seminar in Europe, the question, "Who am I really?" remains profoundly compelling. Because here's the thing, the problems Yajnavalkya was addressing, suffering, mortality, the search for meaning, the desire for freedom, these are universal human concerns. They're not limited to one culture or one era. And his proposed solution, direct insight into the nature of consciousness. This is something anyone can investigate regardless of their background or beliefs. That's why his legacy endures. Not because people are being nostalgic about ancient wisdom, but because he identified something genuinely important and offered a method for exploring it that still works. But how did he prove he was the wisest? How did he establish his authority to make these radical claims? This story is incredible. Alright, now we get to one of the most entertaining and philosophically significant episodes in ancient Indian thought. This is the story that cemented Yajnavalkya's reputation as the greatest philosopher of his age. And it involves 1,000 cows, a king's challenge, and what might be the most audacious intellectual move in history. So here's the setup. King Janaka decides to host a grand philosophical assembly. He invites all the greatest scholars, all the most learned Brahmins, all the philosophical heavyweights of the era. This is the intellectual Olympics, the best of the best, all gathered in one place. And Janaka announces a challenge. He's offering a prize to whoever can demonstrate themselves to be the wisest person present. And the prize? 1,000 cows, each adorned with 10 gold coins attached to their horns. This is serious wealth. This is a life-changing amount of money. Now, imagine the scene. You've got all these scholars, these learned men who've spent decades studying the Vedas, mastering the rituals, memorizing thousands of verses. They're all sitting there looking at these cows, thinking about the prize, but nobody moves. Nobody wants to be the first to claim they're the wisest. It would be arrogant, presumptuous. What if you claim the prize and then get defeated in debate? The humiliation would be unbearable. So there's this tense moment, all these brilliant minds, and nobody's willing to step forward. And then Yajnavalkya does something absolutely outrageous. He turns to his student and says, "Drive these cows home." Just like that. Before any debate has happened. Before anyone has asked him a single question. He just claims the prize. He declares himself the winner before the competition has even begun. Can you imagine the reaction? The shock? The outrage? Who does this guy think he is? But here's what makes this move brilliant rather than just arrogant. Yajnavalkya knows exactly what he's doing. He's not just being cocky. He's making a philosophical point. He's demonstrating that true wisdom isn't about false modesty or social niceties. It's about knowing what you know and being willing to defend it. And defend it he does. Immediately the other scholars start challenging him. And we're not talking about softball questions here. These are the deepest, most difficult philosophical problems imaginable. Questions about cosmology, about the nature of reality, about consciousness, about the gods, about sacrifice, about everything. The text records that 8 prominent scholars challenge him in succession, and one by one, Yajnavalkya defeats them all, not through rhetorical tricks or verbal gymnastics, but through genuine philosophical insight. He answers their questions with such depth and clarity that they have nothing left to say. But the most famous challenge comes from Gargi Vachaknavi. Remember her? The female philosopher we mentioned earlier. She steps forward to challenge Yajnavalkya, and her questions are absolutely devastating. She asks him about the fundamental nature of reality. What is everything woven upon? What's the foundation beneath the foundation? She's pushing him to explain the ultimate ground of being, to go beyond any possible explanation to whatever makes explanation itself possible. And Yajnavalkya's responses are remarkable. He takes her through a series of increasingly abstract levels. Water is woven on air, air on the atmosphere on the worlds of heaven, and so on, each level more fundamental than the last. But then Gargi pushes further. She asks about what those highest worlds are woven upon, and Yajnavalkya warns her, "Gargi, do not question too much, lest your head fall off." Now this sounds like a threat, but it's not. It's actually a philosophical point. He's saying there's a limit to how far conceptual analysis can go. At some point you reach the unconditioned, the absolute, that which cannot be explained in terms of anything else because it's the ground of explanation itself. To keep asking, but what's that based on, is to misunderstand the nature of ultimate reality. And Gargi gets it. She understands. She stops questioning not because she's intimidated, but because she recognizes the philosophical point he's making. And then she does something beautiful. She praises him. She tells the other scholars, "You should consider yourselves fortunate if you escape from him with a mere bow. None of you will defeat him in arguments about Brahman. This is mutual respect between intellectual equals. Gargi challenged him as hard as she could, pushed him to the limits of what can be said, and when she saw the depth of his understanding, she acknowledged it. But the debates continue. More scholars step forward, and each time Yajnavalkya demonstrates not just knowledge but wisdom. He shows that he understands not just the content of the Vedas but their deeper meaning, not just the rituals, but the reality they point toward. What's fascinating about these debates is what they reveal about philosophical authority in that era. This isn't about who has the highest social status or who comes from the right family or who can recite the most verses. This is about who can think most clearly, argue most cogently, penetrate most deeply into the nature of reality. Yajnavalkya wins because he's genuinely the best thinker present. His arguments are superior, his insights are deeper, his understanding is more comprehensive, and everyone there, even his opponents, recognizes this. This is philosophy at its best, not as a power game or a status competition, but as a genuine search for truth where the best argument wins. Where reason and insight matter more than tradition or authority, and by the end of the assembly, Yajnavalkya's status is unquestioned. He's proven himself not through ritual expertise or priestly credentials, but through pure philosophical prowess. He's demonstrated that wisdom, real wisdom, not just learning, deserves the highest honor. The story of the Bahudakshina debate became legendary. It was told and retold, establishing Yajnavalkya as the paradigmatic philosopher-sage, the one who combined intellectual brilliance with genuine realization, the one who could both explain the truth and embody it. And this brings us to the crucial question. So what does all this mean for us right now in the 21st century? Why should we care about a philosopher from 2,700 years ago? So we've traveled through 2,700 years of philosophy. We've explored profound metaphysical claims, systematic methods of inquiry, legendary debates, and enduring textual traditions. But here's the question that matters. Why should any of this matter to you right now in your life? Because here's the thing. Yajnavalkya isn't just some historical curiosity. His ideas aren't museum pieces that we study out of academic obligation. His core insights remain powerfully, urgently relevant to how we live today. Let's start with the most obvious place. The global spiritual landscape. Walk into almost any yoga studio in the world. New York, London, Tokyo, São Paulo. And you're likely to encounter ideas that trace directly back to Yajnavalkya. The concept of the true self beyond the ego, the practice of self-inquiry, the goal of liberation through knowledge rather than just through physical practice. Now granted, a lot of modern yoga has become commercialized, stripped down to just the physical postures. But the philosophical foundation, the reason yoga exists as a practice at all, that comes from this tradition of inquiry into consciousness that Yajnavalkya pioneered. Visit Buddhist meditation centers and you'll find practitioners grappling with the nature of consciousness, the relationship between awareness and its contents, the question of whether there's a stable self or just a flow of changing phenomena. These are Yajnavalkya's questions, even when the answers differ from his. Go to Advaita Vedanta centers. And there are hundreds of them worldwide now. And you'll hear teachings that are essentially elaborations of what Yajnavalkya first articulated. Teachers like Ramana Maharshi in the 20th century, or contemporary teachers like Rupert Spira or Francis Lucille, they're all working within the tradition that Yajnavalkya established. But it's not just in explicitly spiritual contexts. Yajnavalkya's influence shows up in unexpected places. Contemporary philosophy of mind is deeply concerned with what's called the hard problem of consciousness. How does subjective experience arise from objective physical processes? How does the first-person perspective relate to the third-person world of science? These are, in a sense, modern versions of Yajnavalkya's inquiry into the nature of the self and its relationship to reality. Phenomenology, the philosophical study of consciousness and experience, asks many of the same questions Yajnavalkya asked. What is the structure of awareness? What's the relationship between the subject and object of experience? Is there a pure consciousness that underlies all particular experiences? Even in psychology, there's growing interest in what's called metacognition, awareness of awareness, the ability to observe your own mental processes. This is essentially what Yajnavalkya was pointing to with the method of Neti, the capacity to step back from any particular mental content and recognize the awareness that observes it. Mindfulness practices, which have become mainstream in Western psychology and medicine, are built on this same foundation. The recognition that you can observe your thoughts and emotions, rather than being completely identified with them. That's a Yajnavalkya insight, even if most people practicing mindfulness have never heard his name. But let me get more personal, more practical. Why does this matter for your actual life? Because Yajnavalkya's central message is about freedom. Real freedom. Not just political freedom or economic freedom, but freedom from the psychological suffering that comes from misunderstanding who you are. Think about what causes most of our suffering. It's not usually physical pain, though that's real. It's psychological. It's anxiety about the future, regret about the past, fear of death, craving for things we don't have, attachment to things we might lose, the constant sense that something is missing, that we're not enough, that we need to become someone different or achieve something more to finally be okay. And Yajnavalkya's diagnosis is that all of this suffering comes from a fundamental case of mistaken identity. We think we are this limited, vulnerable, mortal person. This body, this personality, this collection of thoughts and memories and fears and desires. And as long as we believe that's what we are, we're trapped. We're at the mercy of circumstances. We're vulnerable to loss and change and ultimately death. But what if that's not what you are? What if your deepest nature is something that can't be threatened, can't be diminished, can't be lost? What if all the things you're afraid of losing are just temporary phenomena arising within something eternal and unchanging? Now, I'm not asking you to believe this. Yajnavalkya wouldn't want you to believe it either. He's asking you to investigate, to look directly at your own experience and see what's actually true. This is where his method remains so relevant. The practice of Neti, systematically questioning every identification, every assumption about who you are, this is something you can do right now. Not as a belief system, but as an inquiry. Who are you when you're not your job title? Not your relationships? Not your accomplishments or failures? Not your body or your thoughts or your emotions? What remains when you strip away all the temporary identifications? This isn't just philosophical navel-gazing. This is practical psychology. Because the more you can recognize that you're not identical with your thoughts and emotions, the less power they have over you. The more you can see your fears and desires as passing phenomena rather than fundamental truths about who you are, the freer you become. And here's what's remarkable. This isn't just ancient wisdom that we're trying to preserve out of respect for tradition. This is ancient wisdom that people are discovering works. That produces real results in terms of psychological freedom, reduced suffering, increased well-being. There's a reason why Yajnavalkya's ideas keep showing up in different forms across different cultures. It's not because of cultural imperialism, or because Indian philosophy is somehow superior to other traditions. It's because he identified something genuinely important about the nature of consciousness and suffering, and he offered a method for investigating it that actually works. The question, who am I? This is not a question that gets answered once and then filed away. It's a living question. A question that each person has to explore for themselves. A question that remains relevant no matter how much our external circumstances change. We live in a world that's radically different from Yajnavalkya's. We have technology he couldn't have imagined, social structures he never encountered, scientific knowledge that didn't exist in his time. But we still suffer. We still fear death. We still struggle with desire and attachment. We still wonder what it all means. And Yajnavalkya's answer is still available. Look within. Question your assumptions. Investigate the nature of consciousness directly. Don't take anyone's word for it, not mine, not his, not anyone's. See for yourself what's true. That's why his philosophy endures, not because it's old, but because it addresses something timeless. Not because it's Eastern or exotic, but because it's universal. Not because it offers comforting beliefs, but because it offers a method for discovering truth. Whether you're a spiritual seeker, a philosopher, a psychologist, or just someone trying to live with more freedom and less suffering, Yajnavalkya has something to offer. Not answers that you accept on faith, but questions that lead you to investigate your own experience. Not doctrines to believe, but practices to try. And that brings us to where we end with an invitation. So let's bring this all together. Let's see what we've discovered about this remarkable thinker and why his voice still echoes across the centuries. We started with a simple question. What makes someone truly wise? And we've seen how Yajnavalkya answered that question not just with words, but with his entire approach to philosophy. He took a world built on ritual, on external performance, on priestly authority, on the belief that cosmic order depended on correct ceremonial action, and he revolutionized it. He said, "Knowledge matters more than sacrifice. Understanding matters more than performance. The truth you're seeking isn't out there in the ceremonies and the offerings. It's within, in the nature of consciousness itself." This was genuinely revolutionary. This was philosophical dynamite. He shifted the entire focus of Indian thought from cosmology to consciousness, from external ritual to internal realization, from priestly authority to direct insight. And he didn't just make abstract claims. He developed methods. The systematic negation of Neti, the careful philosophical argumentation that defeated all challengers, the personal teaching that met students where they were, whether that was his wife Maitreyi seeking immortality or scholars at the king's court defending their positions. His central insight, that the individual self and ultimate reality are one, that Atman and Brahman are identical, that your deepest nature is infinite and eternal. This is one of the most profound metaphysical claims ever made. And whether you ultimately agree with it or not, you have to respect the depth of thought that went into it. But here's what I find most compelling about Yajnavalkya. He wasn't content with just having this insight himself. He wanted to share it. He wanted others to discover it. He developed methods, engaged in debates, taught students, wrote texts, all in service of helping others realize their true nature. And his legacy? It's vast, it's living, it's still unfolding. The Brihadaranyaka Upanishad remains one of the foundational texts of Indian philosophy. The Yajnavalkya Smriti continues to influence Hindu law and ethics. The concept of Advaita that he pioneered became one of the most influential philosophical schools in history. His method of Neti is still practiced in ashrams and meditation centers worldwide. But more than that, his questions remain our questions. Who am I? What is consciousness? How do I transcend suffering? What is the relationship between my individual awareness and the larger reality I'm part of? These aren't solved problems. These are living inquiries that each generation has to explore anew. Throughout history, philosophers have grappled with the fundamental questions of existence. What is real? How should we live? What matters most? And Yajnavalkya's answers, his emphasis on self-knowledge, his method of systematic inquiry, his vision of liberation through understanding, these continue to offer guidance. But here's the crucial point, the one I want to leave you with. Yajnavalkya doesn't want followers. He doesn't want believers. He wants investigators. He wants people who are willing to look directly at their own experience and see what's actually true. His invitation is universal. It transcends culture, religion, time period, social status. It doesn't matter who you are or where you come from. The question, who am I, is available to everyone. The method of investigation is open to anyone willing to try it. You don't need to be a scholar. You don't need to know Sanskrit. You don't need to accept any particular belief system. You just need to be willing to question your assumptions, to look carefully at your own experience, to investigate the nature of consciousness with honesty and rigor. And this is what makes Yajnavalkya's philosophy timeless, not because it offers comforting answers or easy solutions, but because it points you back to your own experience, your own awareness, your own capacity for direct insight. The self is to be known, he says, to be heard of, reflected upon, and meditated upon. By knowing the self, everything becomes known. This isn't mystical obscurantism. This is a precise claim. Understanding the nature of consciousness. Really understanding it, not just intellectually but experientially. This is the key to understanding everything else, because consciousness is what makes all knowledge possible. It's the light by which everything else is illuminated. And if Yajnavalkya is right, if your deepest nature really is infinite, eternal, and free, then discovering this isn't just an interesting philosophical insight, it's liberation. It's the end of suffering. It's the realization that you were never actually bound in the first place. Now, you might agree with this or you might not. You might find it compelling or you might find it unconvincing. But either way, Yajnavalkya has given you something valuable, a question worth exploring, a method for exploring it, and the encouragement to trust your own direct investigation over any authority, including his own. In a world that constantly tells us to look outside ourselves for answers, to experts, to authorities, to traditions, to technology, Yajnavalkya's message is radical. Look within. The truth you're seeking is closer than you think. It's not something you need to acquire or achieve. It's what you already are if you're willing to see it clearly. This is the eternal voice of Yajnavalkya. Not a voice from the distant past, but a voice that speaks to the timeless present. Not offering beliefs to accept, but questions to explore. Not demanding faith, but inviting investigation. Who are you, really? Not your job, not your relationships, not your thoughts or your body or your story about yourself. Who are you when all of that is stripped away? This is Yajnavalkya's question. This is his gift. This is his challenge. And it's a question that's waiting for you to answer. Not with words, but with direct insight into the nature of your own consciousness. The journey from ritual to reality, from ignorance to knowledge, from bondage to freedom, this journey that Yajnavalkya mapped out 2,700 years ago, it's still available, still relevant, still transformative. All you have to do is begin.